Hello there, my name is Dr. Maitland Hislop and welcome to the fourth video in my series on resilience. This video is about organisational resilience and context, particularly Brexit context. Just as in the last video, organisational resilience has a set of characteristics. So similarly to the personal resilience list, we start with a set of values. Values are important for any organisation, and these need to be understood by all members of staff and lived to. This will then give your organisation a clear identity. Along with the values should come a trusted network, and this ranges from a specific approach to governance to having a good board, having access to good professionals such as accountants and lawyers, and of course ensuring that your sales and marketing staff in particularly have good networks through which to distribute your product or service. That said, there should be limits on the operations of the organisation, which are defined by what the organisation is set up to do, and drifting from that has always been a recipe for disaster in most organisations. So understand those limits and understand the market capability of the organisation. Simply put, don't run before you can walk. Your teams should have a buddy system, and that means that everybody from the chief executive down to the shop floor operative should have some buddy friend who understands roughly what they're doing, and in some cases, particularly the CEO, what they're doing in more detail. So if something goes wrong, or if they get hit by a bus, or they fall sick, somebody can pick up the reins and take over quickly, hopefully seamlessly. The organisation should be confident of its place, and of course having values, trusted network, good understanding of marketplace helps with confidence, and also helps with the next important issue, which is communication. Being able to communicate effectively is another factor or characteristic of a good performing organisation. The next issue is that people can control things when they go wrong. And this isn't just about having a business continuity plan. This is about people having those values, having the networks, having the understanding of the market to be able to adjust the priorities and the direction of the business when things don't go quite as well as expected. And of course that means that you know how to get help when required. And getting help when required means you know where to go to fix things when they go wrong. Having said that, the same sort of approaches must be apparent when looking for opportunities. So the organisation should continually look for new opportunities within its operational boundaries, and therefore should be seen as an opportunistic organisation that can take advantage of market changes quickly. All of this assumes that the organisation has to be fit for purpose, and being fit for purpose is a consolidation of all the preceding comments really, and that fit for purpose issue compounds the pursuit of having a clear place and a development plan, even if that development plan means staying steady. It means having a development plan which everybody understands the direction in which the organisation is going. In the last video we talked about the resilience of children and gave some examples from people like Grotberg and Rochlin about the characteristics of highly resilient people. One of the interesting things about aircraft carriers and submarines is that they're extraordinarily complex organisations which hardly ever go wrong. And if you run the foregoing list of characteristics resilient characteristics across a rule which encompasses an aircraft carrier and or a submarine, you'll find that aircraft carriers and submarines are extremely good examples of resilient organisations. Having said that, that's not often the case for about 70% of organisations in the UK. These 70% of organisations do not have business continuity plans, for example, still. So they're not proactive in business continuity. They clearly can't react to a changed global context because they haven't got a plan to do so, nor a changed risk environment, nor the change in dependencies that comes from a changed risk environment, nor how to adjust the staff environment, or even how to manage a crisis environment properly. So these shortcomings in business continuity are significant, particularly at the time of COVID and Brexit. COVID and Brexit being the most disruptive events faced by any organisation possibly over the last 70 years. And not just one of them, both of them are here together. So let's just talk for a moment or two about context. Almost all of you will have had to review context in the wake of Brexit. So if you have a business continuity manager in your organisation, they should be continually busy at the moment trying to work out what precisely the changed context is for your organisation. And that should encompass detailed discussions with all the senior members of the organisation to understand their thoughts, and of course some horizon scanning to understand what's going on in the rest of the world. And the organisation has to understand that globalisation has also changed, not just as a result of Brexit, but that's part of it. The European Union is no longer the sort of organisation you were dealing with before, and these trade deals, which are supposed to have been done with large swathes of the rest of the world, are subject to vagaries which none of you will particularly looked at in detail in the past, and which now need looking at in great detail if you're going to be able to take the opportunity of finding new markets from these newly agreed trade deals with places that we haven't necessarily had trade deals with before. And of course it goes without saying almost that the whole relationship with the European Union has changed. At the same time, we're seeing changes in democracy. We're seeing changes in approach to populism. So we recently had a coup in Myanmar. Now Myanmar's interesting for two reasons. One, it's an interesting market in itself against the background of what we might call the Boris Johnson approach to global Britain. Myanmar would be an interesting market. It also happens to be a growing market, a growing source, I should say, of rare minerals. So if you're in the chip business, for example, then the coup in Myanmar is particularly important, especially when the rest of the world is facing a chip shortage. So democracy and its opposites are important, and of course your business continuity managers and of course your senior management need to be absolutely aware of that and its potential impacts on your organisation. In the same vein, we have different military campaigns going on across the world and different approaches to managing relationships with countries. And all of these are going to affect how your organisation performs in the future. So just to give you an example, of course the Chinese have declared the Myanmar coup as just a cabinet reshuffle, whereas many Western nations have looked upon it askance and said, this is not what should be happening. Now within those two extremes lies the rub for marketing in the future. China and Myanmar together represent two of the biggest sources of rare minerals in the world, to extend the previous analogy. And of course, by agreeing between them that this coup is not going to have a big effect, consolidates the power of those two nations to control rare earths within the world chip environment. So there's an example of how globalization should be looked at in the current Brexit context. At the same time, you're going to be looking at different religions. So most of the European Union is Catholic, and to a lesser extent Protestant. The environments in which you're going to have to operate more from now on are going to be Islamic, Hindu, or in the case of China, secular in the extreme. So operating in these environments are going to require people to be much more sensitive to local customs and culture than perhaps they might have had to be in the past. European Union, for example, socially democratic, has a steady focus on either Catholicism or religion. The values are pretty much common across the whole 27 countries. No real issues. In terms of culture, when you step out of that environment, culture becomes completely different, including, by the way, the United States, which is, well, it talks the same language. I'm sure most of you have come to the conclusion is a completely foreign country, particularly in regard to the extreme right of the Republican Party. So with these sort of changes of culture also comes a change of international law and the approach to finance. International law is based very much in the Western tradition, and most organisations in the West have a reasonable understanding about how that law is applied. That's no longer the case if you're going to start dealing with countries and markets which are east of the Middle East, for example. That's where the big opportunities are. That's where global Britain is supposed to be heading. That's what Brexit is supposed to loosen up. But there the markets are very different in terms of law, in terms of culture, in terms of law, and of course in terms of finance. Once you get into that area, there are not many signatories to the Basel III agreements, for example. So the way in which finance is administered, distributed, how interest rates are applied, who gets paid what, when and to whom, are all very, very different. And this needs to be understood. I suppose the last point on this would be the question of social dissonance. You will see in all these markets that you're going to have to operate on in the future, and even some of those in the European Union, that social dissonance is an increasing feature of these markets. You never quite know how the populace is going to react to political, economic, technical, environmental, legal events. They're all up for grabs in many, many parts of the world. So the environment that most of us are now encountering is a much more Wild West than stable. So that's the key issues on context. And your organisation needs to be looking at context very closely and working out the risks and dependencies in particular about how you're going to operate in these markets in the future. And that's something that we'll come on to in the next video. So thank you very much for watching again, and I look forward to seeing you next time. You can subscribe below this video, and there are some additional comments below the video too. Goodbye now.